The first thing Daniel Price noticed was that the radio kept breathing, not playing, breathing. It came in faintly between stations, beneath the hiss and static, a slow, wet inhalation followed by something like a tremor passing through copper wire. At first, he blamed the storm. Kansas storms had a way of crawling into circuitry, dragging their fingers through frequencies like bored gods. But this storm had ended 3 days ago, and the breathing hadn't. Daniel lived alone at the edge of town, where the road narrowed into a ribbon of cracked asphalt that no one bothered to maintain. His house had once belonged to his grandfather, a quiet man who collected shortwave radios and never spoke of why. Daniel had inherited the radios, not the reasons. There were 12 of them in the house, stacked on shelves, tucked into corners, one even mounted in the bathroom wall like a relic. Most were dead, their dials frozen in place. But one still worked, an old Zenith console radio with a wood veneer warped from age. That was the one that breathed. At first, Daniel thought it was picking up some distant broadcast, numbers stations maybe. He'd read about those, disembodied voices reciting sequences into the void. But this wasn't numbers, this was respiration. He leaned closer to the speaker. The sound deepened, not louder, closer, as if something on the other side of the radio had noticed him noticing. Daniel pulled back sharply. The breathing didn't stop. It simply settled into a patient rhythm, like something waiting for him to return. He laughed then, a brittle, defensive sound. "Yeah," he muttered. "Very funny." He turned the dial. The breathing followed. That night, Daniel dreamed of the ocean. He had never seen the ocean in person, but in the dream, he stood at its edge, watching a black tide roll beneath a sky with no stars. The water didn't crash or foam. It folded inward, like fabric being drawn into a wound. And beneath the surface, something vast shifted. He couldn't see it, not fully, but he knew it was there in the same way you know a cliff is beneath your feet, even in total darkness. The tide receded. The wet sand revealed lines, not random patterns, symbols, thousands of them, etched with impossible precision. They twisted in ways that made his eyes ache, angles bending in directions that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all, a shape, a spiral, but wrong, not curving outward, but inward, endlessly consuming itself. The breathing returned. Only now, it wasn't coming from the ocean. It was coming from behind him. Daniel turned. The sky was watching. He woke with a choking gasp. The radio was on. He was certain he had turned it off. The breathing filled the room now, no longer faint, no longer hidden beneath static. It was layered, complex, multiple rhythms overlapping, like lungs nested inside other lungs. Daniel swung his legs off the bed and approached the radio. "Okay," he said, voice shaking despite his effort to steady it. "Enough." He unplugged it. The breathing didn't stop. It continued, unchanged, spilling into the room as if the radio had only ever been a suggestion of its source. Daniel froze. The sound shifted. For the first time, it wasn't just breathing. It was trying to speak. Over the next few days, Daniel stopped sleeping, not by choice, by necessity. Every time he closed his eyes, he returned to the shoreline. Each time, the symbols spread farther, covering more of the sand, climbing the rocks, etching themselves into the sky. And each time, the thing beneath the water rose a little closer to the surface. He began recording the radio, hours of audio, static, breathing, fragments of something that almost formed words but collapsed into wet, choking syllables. He played them back at different speeds. Slower, the sounds stretched into long, mournful exhalations. Faster, they snapped into sharp, clicking bursts, like bones striking together. Then, one night, he reversed the audio, and the breathing stopped. In its place came a voice, clear, precise, speaking a language that made his teeth hurt. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood their intent. It was the same way you understand a scream, even if you don't know the language. There was structure, repetition, something deliberate. He transcribed the sounds as best he could, writing symbols that approximated what he heard. The symbols from his dream, they matched, not perfectly, but enough. His grandfather's study had always been off limits when Daniel was a child. After the funeral, he'd ignored it. Some part of him had sensed that whatever his grandfather kept in there wasn't meant to be inherited. Now, he broke the door open. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and something else, something mineral, like stone after rain. The walls were covered in notes, pages pinned edge to edge, layered over decades, drawings of the same impossible symbols, variations of the spiral, and in the center of the room, a large wooden desk. On it sat a journal. Daniel opened it. The first page read, "It is not a signal." The entries grew more frantic as he flipped through them. It does not originate from a place. It is not bound by distance. It is aware. Daniel swallowed. The breathing echoed faintly from the hallway. He kept reading. The radios are not receiving. They are aligning. Each frequency is a fraction of a greater shape. When the shape completes, the sentence ended abruptly. The next page was torn out. Daniel spent the rest of the night comparing his notes to his grandfather's. The symbols weren't random. They formed patterns, overlapping structures that only made sense when viewed from multiple angles at once. He began mapping them. Hours blurred together. At some point, he realized the breathing had changed again. It wasn't layered anymore. It was synchronized, perfectly, as if every unseen lung had aligned into a single, unified rhythm. Daniel's pen slipped from his fingers. He looked at the spiral he had drawn. For the first time, it looked complete. The radio crackled. The voice returned. This time, Daniel understood it, not because it changed, because he had. "You are hearing us," it said. The words were not spoken aloud. They existed directly in his mind, each syllable carving itself into his thoughts. Daniel tried to respond, but his voice failed. "You have always been hearing us." The walls of the house creaked. No, not creaked, breathed. The wood expanded and contracted in time with the rhythm. "The alignment is near." Daniel stumbled backward. What are you?" he managed to whisper. There was a pause, not silence, but consideration, as if the concept of what required translation. "We are what remains when sound forgets its source." Daniel's vision blurred. "That doesn't mean anything." "It will." The symbols on the walls began to shift, not physically, but perceptually. Lines bending, angles collapsing into new configurations. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the room was larger, not expanded, revealed. The walls had never been boundaries, only thin suggestions of containment. Beyond them stretched an impossible architecture of intersecting planes, each etched with the same spiraling patterns. And within those planes, movement. Not creatures, processes, vast incomprehensible systems folding into and out of themselves, breathing. "The signal is complete," the voice said. Daniel fell to his knees. "I don't want this," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I don't, please, just make it stop." "It cannot stop." The spiral on the floor pulsed. "You have become a node." Daniel's mind fractured. Not shattered, restructured. He could feel it happening, each thought unraveling and reweaving into something larger. His memories stretched, distorted, connecting to things that weren't his. He saw his grandfather, younger, sitting at the same desk, writing the same symbols. He saw others, dozens, hundreds, across time, across places, all listening to the same impossible broadcast, all aligning. "Why?" Daniel screamed. The answer came gently. "Because you can hear." The house dissolved, not into nothing, but into meaning. Every object became a component of a greater pattern. The radio, the walls, the very air, each a fragment of a signal that had no origin and no end. Daniel felt himself thinning, spreading across frequencies he couldn't name. The breathing was no longer external. It was him. It had always been him. And as that realization settled, the final barrier broke. He understood the spiral, not as a symbol, as a direction, inward, endlessly inward. Days later, the house stood empty. The radio remained on the desk, silent now, unplugged, still. A passerby might have noticed the faint etchings on the walls, the strange spiral carved into the floor, but they would not understand them, not yet. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of distance or time, the signal continued, patient, expanding, waiting for the next mind that could hear. And in the spaces between static, if you listen closely, you can still hear the breathing,